Yes, sir. Well, with what text? Romans 11. All right. Well, now the key to this thing here, this passage here in Romans chapter 11, is talking about gospel privileges to groups and not individuals. Now, first of all, I'll read the thing as always aimed at an individual. We'll take Romans chapter 11, verse 16. For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches, individual people, be broken off, and thou, individual Gentile, Christian, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them partake of the root and fatness of the olive tree, boast not against the branches, the Jews, but if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. Thou wilt say the branches were broken off, the Jews, that I might be grafted in, the Christian Gentile. Well, because of unbelief they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high and minded, but fear. For if God spared not the natural branches, the Jews, take heed lest he spare not the born-again Christian. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God. On them which fell, the Jews are lost to salvation, severity, but toward thee the Christian goodness, if you continue in his goodness. Otherwise, you'll be cut off and go to hell. And they also, if they, the Jews, abide still not in unbelief, shall be grafted in, for God is able to craft, so forth and so on. Now, when you read it that way, then it looks like, well, you got saved, and if you're not careful and you quit believing, then you're going to go to hell and you're going to lose it. And so that's a verse used by people who can talk about the Christian losing his salvation. Now, keep your hand Romans chapter 11 there, and we'll come back to it in a minute. And we'll go to Timothy, you get 2 Timothy chapter 2, and notice we've got a real problem here. Because in 2 Timothy chapter 2, we find if a Christian quits believing, he is still saved anyway. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 11. And notice a different context. In Romans 11, he's talking about Jews and Gentiles. In 2 Timothy, he's talking about the individual Christian. 2 Timothy 2:11. It is a faithful saying, if we be dead with him, we shall live with him. If we suffer, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he will deny us. What, salvation? No. Verse 13. If we believe not, yet he abideth faithful, he cannot deny himself. Then he'll deny you something, verse 12, but he won't deny you himself, verse 13. What'll he deny you, verse 12? He'll deny you a reign. If we suffer with him, we shall reign with him. If we deny him, he'll deny us. Now, that's that case, that unfaithful servant. He came back and he said, well done, thou good and faithful servant. I rule over 10 cities. Well done, thou faithful servant. I have 5 cities. One fellow said, take what he has and give it the rest of them. He denied that fellow something, but not salvation. Now he said, if we believe not, yet he abideth faithful, he cannot deny himself. Doctrinally speaking, I am part of Christ, Christ part of me. If he denied me, he'd be denying part of himself. Ephesians 5 says, I am bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh, we're members one of another. He that has joined the Lord is one spirit. I'm in him, he's in me. So if he were to deny me, deny part of himself. He's not going to do that. If you get saved and are born again, you know what you could do? You go around saying, I'm not saved, I'm an atheist, I'm going to hell, and you go to heaven anyway. Of course, you might take a shortcut. Lord might get you out of the way quick so you'd do a lot of damage. But you're still going. Now come back to Romans chapter 11, and let's read it right this time. Romans chapter 11, the whole subject of that entire chapter is the Jews as a people and the Gentiles as a people, not individuals. Look at Romans chapter 11, verse 11. I say then, have they stumbled, they should fall? God forbid, that rather through their fall, the Jews, salvation has come to the Gentiles. He's talking about groups. Now 13 should end the matter. I speak to you Gentiles, not Christians. Somebody made a mistake. I think that passage was written to Christians. That passage wasn't written to Christians. Verse 13, I speak to you who? Gentiles. The passage is aimed at the Romans, not at a bunch of saved people. All right, now keep your hand in Romans chapter 11 and turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And notice how important it is that you get the distinction between a Christian and a Gentile. 1 Corinthians 10:32. Because when God deals with groups of people, he always deals with three groups. And those groups are the Jew, the Gentile, and the Church of God. The church is this body. The church has neither Jew nor Gentile in it. But outside of the church, there's Jew and Gentile. 1 Corinthians 10:32. Give none offense, neither to the Jews, there's your first group, nor to the Gentiles, there's your second group, nor to the church of God, there's your third group. So when God deals with mankind, he sees them in three groups. A church composed of neither Jew nor Gentile, and then outside that church, Jew and Gentile. All right, now back to Romans 11, verse 13. Now we'll see what we have. What we're talking about in Romans chapter 11 is not an individual Christian being grafted into Christ. What we're talking about here is a bunch of Gentile nations being grafted in the nation of Israel so they have a chance to get saved. 13, I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles. I magnify mine office. Verse 16, if the first fruit, that's Israel, be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches were broken off, parts of Israel, and thou being a wild olive tree, Gentile, Romans, were grafted in among them, and with them partake of the root and fatness of the olive tree. You have a chance to be saved. You have the Jewish Messiah preached to you. It's even further than that. You have a Jewish book dumped in your lap. People don't realize that. Salvation of the Jews. You partake of Israel when you read that book. Every writer in that book is a Jew. I know Dr. A.T. Robertson said Luke was a Gentile, but Dr. A.T. Robertson didn't have the sense that God gave a brass monkey on a cold winter afternoon. People just get all messed up. Luke was a Gentile. On the basis of what? He don't know what he's talking about. A.T. Robertson had 22 years of Greek. That fixed him for good. He got Greekitis and flipped out. Somebody said, well, Luke's a Gentile name. Well, what do you think Mark is? What do you think John is? John's about to be born, and all of Elizabeth and Zachariah's kinfolk say, you don't have anybody in your family named John. That's a Gentile name. He said his name is John. Well, those names are Gentile names. Just because a Jew has a Gentile name, I don't mean he's a Gentile. What do you think Stephen is? How are you going to get a Jew out of Stephen? I'll tell you a good one, James. Why, there are more Southern boys named Jimmy than any other boy. Of all the names down south, the most common name is Jimmy. That's James. What's that? That's Jacob. That's Jacob. That's a Jewish name, Jacob. All right, Romans chapter 11, verse 18. Boast not against the branches, but that thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. Thou wilt say the branches were broken off, I might be grafted in. That is an individual. That's a Gentile nation talking. For if God spared not the natural branches, the Israelites, take heed he spare not thee, the Gentiles. Behold the goodness and severity of God to them which fell, the Israelites, severity, but toward thee, the Gentiles, goodness. If thou continue in his goodness, thou shalt be cut off. The thou in that passage is not a man. The thou in that passage is the Gentile nations. If there's the slightest doubt about it, look at this thing on down here in verse 25. For I would not, brethren, you should be ignorant of this mystery. There's the Christians. Brethren, lest you be wise in your own conceit, that blindness in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, and so Israel shall be saved. So chapter 11 is not talking about individual salvation at all. It's talking about the Gentiles' opportunity to hear the gospel when God rejected Israel. Yes, sir. Nothing like a Bible to clear up a college education.